jury has determined Jordan Peters suffered from a mental condition when he stabbed his mother in Clintonville last summer. The woman later died. Last week, the same jury convicted the 20-year-old of first-degree intentional homicide. This additional verdict was phase 2 of the trial, which we reported on, determining whether Peters' mental state makes him culpable of the crime. Instead of life in prison, he has committed to the custody of DHS and will stay at a psychiatric facility. More at WBAY.com.